when we call Trump a fascist, a lot of people, especially on the right, hear that as we are insulting him with a mean name. Because when they call Kamala Harris communist or Marxist, they don't actually mean Kamala Harris wants to seize the means of production. That's not what they mean. They're using it just as a pure insult. So when we're using fascist, we're not using it as an insult. We're using it as a descriptor.
Okay, very cool. Jon Cooper, you run the TikTok account Counterpoint Politics. Now, you don't know this, but when my audience hears the name Jon Cooper, they don't think of you or anyone else besides the lead singer from a band called Skillet, who does not like people like me. Jon Cooper from Skillet started out in the evangelical Christian rock scene with his band. They blew up years ago, and he's steadily declined down to the bottom of the far right rabbit hole. So now he's one of these, like Make America Great Again, live for faith, live for family. So audience, this is not that Jon Cooper, although I have reached out to him many times to come on the podcast and he has not. This is a different Jon Cooper, one you're probably going to like. So Jon, it's great to have you on the podcast, my friend. Thanks for making time.
Thank you for having me. Yes, unlike the other Jon Cooper, I do not have a lick of musical talent, although I hope that my opinions on politics are a little better than his.
I think so, because I found your stuff a while ago. I followed it, and we connected because I saw you saying a lot of the same things that I was saying, like, hey, we need to understand that we got shellacked by right-wing media, and we got to start building some new coalitions. And frankly, and we're going to get into this, you are someone I think I would categorize, and maybe I don't know, in the more secular left world of politics and content creation. I'm more in the progressive leftist Christian world of content and politics, that kind of stuff. And they're both kind of like their own unique worlds that are not super popular in like the American psyche. And so it's just been interesting meeting people in different spaces of their own subculture. I am kind of curious for you. I mean, give us some background, why you even started Counterpoint Politics, what you actually believe. Are you religious? Maybe you are. I don't know. Give us the introduction to Jon.
Yeah. So I started Counterpoint Politics kind of as a more artistic outlet. As a film major back in school, and I discovered I didn't want to make movies. That is a very rough lifestyle if you ever want to get into it. So I went into marketing, but that was like my artistic outlet, making videos and stuff. And it just kind of caught on. I just consistently committed myself to making, a certain amount of videos every week, getting progressively better, attracting more of an audience. And now I have, believe, over 90,000 followers on TikTok, 30,000 on Instagram. And I've also started, as you mentioned, working with other left-wing content creators. I've created a YouTube channel called The Left Wing, which is essentially our podcast. Not nearly as big as this one, but going to plug that for anyone interested in listening to that, where we bring on, I believe, we scheduled an appearance for you on the podcast later in December, but we bring on, other voices from the left to kind of discuss current events. And the original, impetus for that was what you were kind of just mentioning, is building that infrastructure on the left to combat the Daily Wires, the PragerUs, the Turning Points USAs of the world. We've found that it's hard to do without the funding and organization that those organizations have. But I think the tides are turning there, Tim. I think that we're coming to a bit of a reckoning, and I don't know how much progress we're going to make in kind of weeding out these establishment Dem voices who have just gotten their ass kicked over and over again for my entire life.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I think that, a loss is an opportunity for change. And that is the way I'm viewing it.
This is a very important conversation because we come from two different worlds, two different ways of thinking about the world. And it's important because I want my audience to understand a different way of seeing things. So are you religious at all, or are you more secular? Like, how do you define your background there when it comes to faith?
Yeah, so when it comes to faith, I define my background as I'm not a religious person, but I was raised Catholic, have my personal grievances against the Catholic Church, as anyone who is aware of religion can probably guess at. And I left the church. I'm not necessarily a religious person and don't like a lot of the organized religion.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned to you, I think Jesus is one of the best philosophers we've ever had. I don't necessarily personally believe he's the son of a deity, but basically 98% of the rest of the stuff he says, I am all on board with. And I do think, kind of as you mentioned there, as much as that isn't really the viewpoint of a lot of Christians, that Jesus's teachings very much align with left-leaning politics, I do think that is a bridge which we should be constructing here in America, because it is very, very true.
Well, let's talk about left-wing politics. I got to be honest, my background is evangelical, right-wing, conservative fundamentalism. So I'm familiar with that world. I mean, I have a good grasp on the difference between Republicans and conservative and now the MAGA movement, because I kind of come from that. But I'm still trying to get my finger and my head around Democrat versus leftist, progressive versus liberal. Can you kind of break down for me how you think about the world? Like, I'm assuming you identify as a leftist or someone on the left. What are the core values of leftism? Is that even a word? I don't even know. But like, what is, give me the boundaries and definitions here and how they kind of maybe coalesce with democratic principles and maybe align with some things with the party versus the separation between, yeah, I'm not going to get behind that as a leftist, even though the Democratic Party is closer to me than Republicans, for example.
Well, Tim, that could be a whole series of 10 podcasts in that one question.
Well, you got 2 minutes.
But I'll give you the TLDR. No,
yeah, I would love to know.
So from the the leftist progressive perspective, there's we always think about politics, at least in America, on this left versus right axis, which I think is becoming increasingly inaccurate, because if we're going to break it down and still oversimplify it, there's really two axes. There's authoritarian and libertarian, where authoritarians are the governments that very much strictly control everything about daily life. You might see that as communist Russia and current iteration of China, very authoritarian. So were the Nazis. Those are all examples of authoritarian governments, but those political ideologies are in direct opposition to each other. Whereas when you see more liberal, more left-leaning views, they tend to be highly egalitarian. They tend to be very much focused on individual equality and equality of opportunity. Whereas you see more right-wing ideologies being more hierarchical, where and this is where I was actually just having a conversation about how religion plays into this and why it so often fits into right-wing politics is, in basic religious dogma, God sets the rules for what is moral and we all follow them. Yeah. And that fits very well into the more hierarchical mindset of a lot of people on the right, where it's like, okay, Donald Trump, he's the guy I trust. He's going to set the rules. And then there's a hierarchical system below that. And that is kind of the two axes that we're seeing kind of charting things. So where I land on that and where a lot of leftists land on that is egalitarian and also libertarian. So we support things like, freedom of speech in the same way that you might see some right-wingers do it. But, and we also support things like universal health care, because we think everyone should have equal access to health care. We support, very few restrictions on immigration. I'm personally an open borders advocate. And because I see everyone is created equal, why should someone not get the same rights I do because they were born on a different piece of dirt than I was, And there's also a lot of economic evidence that would be beneficial. But noted. Okay. There's different sects, though. Like there are what we'd call a tanky, who are more authoritarian, egalitarian, that would support more the likes of a Leninist, communist Russia, So it's a broad spectrum, Tim, and I hope I gave you a little bit of a TLDR, but the Republicans and the Democrats have typically been in the center of that spectrum, with a lot of these ideologies much farther away. And those parties historically, I think we're starting to see a little bit more of a divergence, but historically have coalesced towards the center when it comes to their actual policy.
Well, let me ask you a question that kind of fleshes out in the real world, because one of the questions I think about is, I understand what you said about, like more individual liberties and freedoms versus maybe more hierarchical ways of seeing the world. COVID, though, is kind of an interesting case study, right? Because in the spaces I existed in, and by the way, I was one of these people,
Yep.
I was very much in favor of the government saying, hey, we have these mandates in place. Hey, we have to wear a mask. Hey, social distancing is important, because I saw it as the government stepping in to really, sustain to the best of their ability public health. And a lot of people in the right use the freedom argument, freedom from government. They use the tyranny argument, freedom from tyranny to resist, things like wearing a mask or social distancing orders. So, how do you make sense of that as someone who's a leftist? Like, were you someone who was like, yes, I think the government should enforce these laws, or I'm sorry, these recommendations, like these guidelines? Or were you someone who's like, no, like, I want to be as consistent as I can with my ideology. So, live and let live. It's kind of up to you. How do you navigate something like that?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and it's one that I think trips a lot of people up. So
right.
Personally, I side more on the government should be actively involved in trying to combat this pandemic. Because, this is a very, very dangerous event, similar to a asteroid hitting the Earth, a world war. At sometimes you're going to have to cede individual liberties in order to protect the community. And this is one of those instances. And I think that it's a little harder to discuss about COVID, but I think it's very easy to discuss about something like a vaccine mandate for a public school. Because if you look at a measles mandate for a public school, sure, the government is telling you that you have to modify your body with this vaccine. And that is at some level an infringement on your personal liberties. But the government is also telling all of the other kids in the school, they have to go to school. And not only is that, something I do personally believe in, it's just a baseline for any developed economy that we need a public education system. We need an informed citizenry that's able to, do all of the jobs that our country requires, right? So if I'm going to allow you to go to that school without a measles vaccine, well, that's now putting the bodily autonomy of everyone else in that school at risk, especially the children who might be immunocompromised, might die, from something that you wouldn't. So when it comes to is this authoritarian versus libertarian?
Right.
It's kind of like you're picking your poison. You have to, at some level, tell someone either you have to get this vaccine, or tell someone else you have to be in this room with this person that could potentially kill you. And so that is a trade-off. And when you have a trade-off like that, I'll usually side on the side that we have evidence from public health research, from scientists, from medical professionals that show that we're going to have a more positive overall impact on public health. Less kids are going to die, less people are going to die, people are going to be healthier. I'm going to side with that side when we hit that trade-off. I'm going to look at the evidence and see what I'm willing to trade, because there's always a trade-off.
Right. Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think about the idea of looking for the common good. There has to be some degree of a community saying, for the common good, we're okay doing this, or, with the government enforcing certain regulations, right? I mean, this happens all the time. If you want to build a house in someone's neighborhood, you have to pass a lot of government red tape and regulation to make sure that you're a qualified builder to build a house that is then safe for someone to live in, right? You can't just build a house and have someone buy it without it getting inspected by the township, et cetera. So we are used to regulation. That's not necessarily a bad word. I think what's interesting is I'm just trying to, and I'm really asking out of curiosity, because I want to learn how a major leftist worldview would kind of look at things like that, or even things like the free market, for example, right? I do want the government regulating massive, huge corporations that seem to want to intentionally exploit their workers for unfair profits. In Walmart's case, putting them on food stamps at some point and making them dependent on government subsidies to make ends meet. That seems like an unethical operation of Walmart, especially considering how much money they profit. So it seems like it's, and I don't have maybe the best language for it, but it seems like for the leftists, broadly speaking, there is some kind of dance between we want to promote human flourishing for as many people as possible. And if that means in this certain case, less government or more government makes the most sense, we're cool utilizing either one to promote the common good of all of our fellow neighbors. Is that a fair assessment, or am I still way off?
No, that's a very fair assessment. And of course, all of these things come on a spectrum.
Totally.
The only thing that I can guarantee you will always be the same with the left is that we will always disagree with each other.
It seems that way.
It is a very, one of the issues is that we always say, like, the Republicans tend to fall in line. They have a very homogenized base. They don't have as much infighting as we do. And so it's harder to corral the cats on our side of the aisle to push for a single vision. But yeah, in terms of where looking at the public good of a policy, you mentioned the free markets. I think that you need a mix of free markets and public sector. The right answer is somewhere in the middle there. Right now, we heavily lean towards the private sector.
Right.
But what I say is, if there isn't a benefit to privatizing a sector, it should probably be public. Like we saw with the 2008 financial crisis, we had banks, we had airline, we had all of these too big to fail infrastructures that our government bailed out.
Right.
And I agree that it needed to be bailed out. It was too big to fail. It stopped us from falling off a total cliff and entering another depression. But the problem is those companies used that money, survived, weathered it, and then did a bunch of stock buybacks.
Right.
And we basically invested publicly all of this money into these companies and got nothing in return except they continued operating and generating a profit off of us.
Right.
And one of the ways I see an ability to build bridges between the left and the right is through these more populist messages. You'll get left-wing people pissed off about that. You'll get right-wing people pissed off about that. And they should be. In the same way, you'll get right-wingers pissed off at corporate elites and left-wingers pissed off at corporate elites. And what you said, like Walmart, they're profiting a bunch of money, but we're subsidizing their labor force with food stamps.
Right.
That doesn't make much sense. Right. And what I always say is, when we talk about things like capitalism and communism and socialism, it really gives a lot of biases that I think people have a difficulty seeing past. And the way I package it is, hey, I want everyone to get their fair share of the pie.
Right.
If a capitalist is investing money up front and building a company, they should profit off of that. But you know what? Maybe they shouldn't get 100% of the profits. Maybe some of those profits should be shared with the labor force that is doing the work.
Right.
And I think that is a message which will resonate with a lot of people who would reject things like socialism or communism.
Right.
But that's how we build,
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, so I go to Turning Point USA events. I'm not sure if I told you that. I've been to America Fest. I've been to 2 pastor summits. I'm going back to America Fest this December. And, I talked to a lot of these folks privately, off the record. And I've gotten some surprising agreement around things like affordable healthcare. This is a true story, John. I had a group of pastors who were at this Turning Point Pastor Summit. They were listening to people say, if at the time, if Biden gets reelected, they're going to throw us in prison. I mean, that's how extreme the rhetoric was. I had those pastors in a room with me, and we all agreed that the college loan system is predatory and probably should be forgiven, and college should be accessible to all people affordably. They agreed with me on that. And I'm like, what are we arguing over? Like, yes, like guys, I'm not here. Whatever caricature you think of me of being some crazy Marxist, whatever that even means, I'm just saying, like, can we agree that like the college loan system is predatory? Colleges have expanded their endowments, and they've invested billions into entertainment because of the government subsidies that have happened, and because of the college loan system being so predatory. We need to get back to affordable college so people have access to those things. And they agreed. So I'm with you. I think that if we can talk to our fellow neighbors, all of them, and talk about how, unions actually help the worker have a more fair wage. They actually secure retirement benefits. Hey, maybe it's unethical that Amazon is not paying their employees fairly for working 40 hours a week, right? That kind of stuff I do think resonates, but I don't know how we communicate that to people. And I don't know how we kind of get over the hump of the right-wing media sphere that is getting bigger and bigger. It's well funded, that pushes the narrative that if you're a Democrat, you're a demon, or you're a crazy commie and you just hate America and you're, quote, the enemy from within. That's incredibly damaging rhetoric to get around, because I will tell you, as someone who went to the DNC, I did not hear and I was there 4 nights out of 5 in the main room. I did not hear anything close to the level of dehumanization that I've heard from right-wing space. I mean, it wasn't even close. I heard a lot of calls for unity, for working together, for thinking about fair wages, for getting gun control in check so we stop killing kids in our schools, like very like unifying messages. And yet it seems like for whatever reason, the country just did not resonate and wanted the strong man. So I'm just kind of curious some of your thoughts on that as a leftist.
Well, so as a leftist, I think that I would not consider myself a Marxist in particular, but I think that if you read Marx and what he says about fascism, you see a lot of parallels here, where what we've seen is growing wealth inequality. And wealth inequality, more than anything else, pisses people off. You can look up studies that they've done on monkeys where they give one monkey like a banana and it pisses the rest of the monkeys off, and they're actually happier if no monkeys get the banana, and humans operate the same way. We seek equality. We don't want to be feeling like we are given an unfair treatment. And we've done studies where if someone's living in a wealthy neighborhood, they're the poorest person in the wealthy neighborhood, they tend to be less happy than someone who is richer in a poorer neighborhood.
Wow.
Right. And that's kind of the fundamental root of why people are pissed off right now. And when you look at the Democratic Party, yes, there was cause for unity. There was cause against, this dehumanization that going on the right. But the problem is people were still angry. People want someone to blame. They don't always know why they're angry. They don't always understand why they're angry. They might be blaming the wrong people because they are angry. But you know what? Donald Trump gave him a pretty easy thing to blame. He said, blame the immigrants, blame those darn evil Democrats, the Joe Biden administration that rose the prices of eggs.
Right.
And was he telling the truth and what was actually to blame? No. But the Democrats didn't really provide another answer because they were kind of afraid to say, yeah, guys, it's the corporate greed. And we saw Bernie back in 2016 and 2020 really gain a ton of grassroots energy from a lot of places like, Latinos, other minorities, young men, that Trump has made these massive gains in over the past 8 years. And that's because the Democrats have kind of leaned away from that Bernie style messaging. But Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie in 2020.
I know.
That it's not that far away. The Democrats have the right answers. They don't have to lie about it, but they need to start leaning into that populist messaging that's supporting the common man, not the establishment that people have come to distrust.
Well, that brings us to the elephant in the room, my friend, because I have watched two divergent streams of thought in these more progressive spaces. And I think you and I are on the same side of this conversation. I've seen some people be like, guys, can we now finally acknowledge that, having Dick Cheney endorse you maybe wasn't the best freaking idea, right? And can we acknowledge that maybe Joe Biden running for president up until the last minute wasn't a good idea? And can we recognize that maybe, deciding not to invest heavily into your influencer culture was not a good idea, right? Like we started kind of saying, look, I get that right-wing outfunded, right-wing media outfunded left-wing media. I understand that, for example, I know according to an insider that on TikTok, conservative media outperformed left-wing media at a rate of 500 to 1 because of all the money that they were throwing into those spaces, blowing up small accounts into big ones, right? I get all that. And can we also acknowledge that maybe there's something to this democratic elitism caricature that we hear about? Because I was not thrilled, my friend, watching that campaign. I sat there in the DNC next to Kassam Rashid, a human rights lawyer, a great friend of mine. And we're like, why is Adam Kinzinger on this stage and not one Palestinian voice? Why am I watching military generals brag about how powerful a military is? The world's largest exporter of arms that's bombing children. Am I at the right rally, the right convention? And so that's one side. And the other side is like, how dare you? How dare you critique these sacred people who have done so much good work? And the reality is maybe Joe Biden did. Maybe Joe Biden did pass good bills. Maybe Joe Biden did try to pass, a real conservative bill on immigration, which I know you and I might have some disagreements on here and there. But the point is like he did maybe some good things. However, and I'm pretty tapped into politics. I live in New Jersey. You're across the bridge from me. Pretty blue areas. my price of eggs did go up. Regardless of inflation coming down on a macro level, on a micro level, my family still feels it. Car loans are through the roof. Trying to buy a house, forget about it. I'm not blaming Biden necessarily for that. I'm just saying I understand how someone can think those things, and then when you're not really combating it with compelling messaging, and you have Dick Cheney, the warmonger, endorsing you, and you're like, "Look, guys, we're doing it. I'm campaigning with Liz Cheney now." I'm like, you can't out-Republican the Republicans. It's never going to work.
Exactly. If you give Republican voters the option between Republican light and Republican, they're going to vote Republican. I know it's a shock, but right. It's what's going to happen. We didn't even see. She lost. Right. The margin of victory among Republican voters compared to Joe Biden. Right. And all of that effort really just served to deflate her base. Right. And not attract anyone. And historically in the United States, there's something called median voter theorem. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's the theory that has been, and it is backed up by data, that you need to campaign towards the center in order to win a general election. But I think that we have seen that change. And I think Donald Trump is the evidence of this, where in an increasingly bipolar society, which, again, the root cause of which is the growing wealth inequality, you're going to now see the center doesn't even have the most people in it. Instead of a bell curve, you're now seeing a bimodal curve. And if you campaign to the center, it's going to disenfranchise your base. It's going to de-energize them. And that's exactly what we saw here. It's not like Trump gained a ton of votes compared to 2020. It's that the Democrats lost them. Right. And they did so by campaigning to the center, walking around with the Cheneys. And that they should have been trying to pump up and energize their base the way Trump does. Which, by the way, we have to acknowledge that the Center for America is still pretty right. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that there's just a mirage in American politics that, AOC or someone like that is on the far left. She is not far left. I mean, she's more left than the typical Democratic establishment person for sure. But she's not far left, by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. But again, right-wing media is so effective in painting these pictures. Joe Biden, the most extreme president we've ever had. Are you kidding me? Joe, the guy who couldn't even get student loan forgiveness done, that guy is the most extreme. The guy who tried to pass the most conservative bipartisan immigration bill in our lifetime, maybe in American history, that guy's not extreme left, my friends. And again, I'm not even knocking that as a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's not what he is. And I know for a fact there's some in my audience who might really disagree strongly with both of us. And that's fine. I welcome dissent. This is not, only what I say goes. People are welcome to disagree with me. But the data doesn't lie. I mean, this was not a close election. Harris gained, she did not overperform in any single state, period, any single county, period. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not all one thing, right? I think we would both agree there's definitely racism as a part of this, misogyny is a part of this, people are transphobic. Sure, those are all elements. But as we talked about on the show before, we don't want to go back to fundamentalist thinking of just black or white. Oh, they're all racist and misogynistic people. That's why Trump won. No, that could be part of it, but there are other factors at play for the average person who goes to work and gets home and wonders, how am I going to pay the bills, right? Because to your point, John, we know that the average American does not have an emergency savings account that can cover $1,000 expense. Most Americans have crippling either medical or student loan debt, right? Most Americans cannot find a job at 40 hours a week that pays them a livable wage. They're worried about their health care. They're worried about if they're going to have a family. Where do they find their house and not go bankrupt trying to pay a mortgage plus a student loan debt that doesn't even get erased if you declare bankruptcy? So there are other factors at play here on top of some people really thinking that a woman can't lead anywhere, let alone in the Oval Office. That definitely is a factor, but I don't think it was the only factor that swung the election this far. That's my thought. I would love your thoughts on this. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I compare it. Have you ever seen the show House? I love House. I love House too. And something that he always said is it's never lupus. Because if it is lupus, he can't solve it. It's incurable. And I think that is the mindset that I bring to this. Definitely, racism and sexism played a role. But if you're going to sit here and tell me that the American population is just too racist and sexist to ever elect Kamala Harris, no, I think you're wrong about that. And even if you're right about that, it doesn't serve us any benefit to operate as if you are. We need to operate under the assumption that these people are gettable, that they are swingable. And I think that, Joe Biden, not Joe Biden, Joe Rogan endorsing Bernie Sanders, who is far more of a leftist than Kamala Harris has ever been,
Right.
is going to demonstrate that all of these people are very gettable. It's just that the Democratic Party has neglected them. And when they say things, I see establishment Democrats saying, oh, well, Kamala Harris ran a historically great campaign. The American people were just too dumb and sexist.
Right.
No, that's the exact messaging that's turning people off from the Democratic Party. I've been saying, if anyone has ever been in a relationship, I don't know if this is relatable, but if you've ever had a relationship and your partner is upset about something, and this should particularly appeal to men, because I feel like most straight men have had this happen to them, where
married for 8 years here. Go ahead, I'm ready.
Their partner is upset about something, and we're like, hey, babe, don't be upset about this thing. You're actually wrong. That doesn't work, because it just pisses them off more. You are negating their feelings and trying to just convince them that they're wrong. And that's basically what the Democratic Party did this cycle. They're like, oh, no, guys, you aren't actually hurting. Inflation is down. Look at this graph.
Right.
And it's like, that message doesn't work. But the message that does work is, hey, I understand why you feel this way.
Right.
I'm taking the responsibility to fix this for you. And this is how I'm doing it, by going after these guys that caused the problem.
Right.
That's a winning message.
Yeah.
Hey, you're wrong. You're not hurting. Look at this graph. Ain't going to win anyone.
Hi friends, if you're enjoying this video, I have a favor to ask. The New Evangelicals is a 501c3 nonprofit, and if you've looked around at all, you've probably noticed that we don't offer member subscriptions on YouTube or Patreon options. The reason for this is very simple. It's been our mission since the beginning to offer all of our content and community resources completely paywall free. What this means is that we are completely dependent on the generosity of people like you who donate to make this work possible and accessible for all. If our content has helped you, would you consider donating to keep it all going? You can find the link in the description of this video, and to be very clear, this is not about giving to God or something like that. We're not a church, and this is not a tithe. The ask is so simple. If our work has helped you, would you be willing to help us make this content accessible to more and more people? All donations made in the US are tax deductible, and every bit helps. Thank you for your generosity. Right, and to be clear, we're just right now, friends, audience, we're in political analyst mode. We're not making moral judgments about what is the moral messaging. Okay, obviously we know what Trump ran on as far as his campaign of dehumanization, of lies, of propaganda. I mean, Elon Musk, I think an article came out that he was the largest spreader of disinformation on his own platform. These people do not tell the truth. So we're not making moral judgments saying, look, we have to embrace that kind of messaging. But we have to understand, again, if we want to know how this happened, we have to be realists, and we have to be as data informed as possible, trying to make sense of how this election went this way, when a lot of us, you saw all the pundits, even Trumper pundits, this is a razor thin election. It's going to be super close. We don't know what's going to happen. And it was not close. The House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the presidency, I mean, it's all red, and not just red, it's MAGA red. So like, we have to think about this stuff as logically as we can. And I think you're right. I mean, I saw a lot of people who I respect and love. I mean, this is no shade thrown to those people. We have to build more bridges and stop infighting if we're going to get, messaging out there. So this is not me taking shots at those people, but I saw a lot of friends of mine who are more Democratic than I am as far as like being in the more aligned with the party, under Joe Biden, and they would list all the accomplishments, and they could be right. They probably are right. They're probably factually right. But my bottom line, as far as my dollar goes, or my neighbor's dollar, that there's like a mismatch there. Now, I'm not saying I voted for Trump because of that. Obviously, I voted for Harris for a lot of reasons. I'm just saying I understand how the average low information voter, which simply means someone who's not tied into this world like we are, right? I can understand how they would just put two and two together in their mind. Well, if my bottom dollar feels like this, or if I feel like the state of the country is heading in the wrong direction, or if I believe the propaganda that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our society, which of course statistically they're half as likely to commit violent crimes as their native-born citizen, which we know. But when you're tapped into right-wing media, or even the peripheral of like, oh, I like listening to Theo Von. He's just a fun guy to listen to. And then boom, Trump is on there. You can see how the pipeline, how it works. It's just so evident, right? And there's really been no answer for the Democratic establishment to counteract that messaging. And that's a major problem. I mean, it's a big problem.
Yeah, and you're really hitting the nail on the head here, because as much as I would like to see the Democratic Party's policy be much more progressive than it currently is,
Sure.
if you compare it to the Republican policy is not the issue. Policy is the economy under Democrats has outperformed the economy under Republicans every year of my lifetime. It's really, if you look at the data on employment rate, on income, average median income, median household income. There we go. You look at all of these different metrics, the Democrats perform better. And there's a reason for that. It's because the policy is more effective. And yet, for my entire life, Republicans have consistently been viewed as the economically superior party.
Right.
Because their messaging is dominant. It is better. It is not a failure of policy in the Democratic Party. It is a basic failure of messaging. Yeah. And I think this is where we get to opinion, but I think my opinion is correct. And I'm admitting that as a left-wing content creator, I am biased in this. But I think that the problem with the messaging is that the party is in between a rock and a hard place. They don't want to piss off their donors, but their people don't like their donors.
Right.
They don't want to piss off their corporate donor base, but that's what the people want. That's the actual bad guy that is actually causing the problems that the people want them to go after, but they don't. And so the Democrats will say all of these things about, hey, look, Trump is ruining the country. Trump is divisive. Trump is a fascist, whatever. But you know what? Without a base level academic understanding of why those things are,
right,
the average person is going to look at it and go like, what do you mean? You've been in charge the last 4 years. What are you talking about? Trump hasn't been in power. That's been you guys. Right. Clearly, if I'm hurting, it's your fault.
Right.
And that's all it is. Now, if they gave them someone to blame, if they went to bat for the people and said, hey, we're going to take on these corporations, which to a certain extent they did. I've been blown away by Joe Biden's National Labor Relations Board. Lena Khan is awesome. Like, I have actually been standing up for Biden in leftist circles when it comes to at least labor issues, because he has been the best president of my lifetime when it comes to that. Is there more to go? 100%. But like, we should be happy about that. But the average American doesn't get it at all. They don't, because Biden wasn't able to be an effective communicator because of his age. Right. We should have a president who's going on Instagram Live like AOC and talking directly to the American people. 100%. They should be going on Rogan. They should be going on these podcasts. They should be going on these places that the average American is actually watching. If you look at the audience that watches cable news, they mostly voted for Kamala Harris anyway. The high informed people were already voting Democrat. It's the other places that they need to get these messages to.
I've been working in progressive Christian spaces, in these, they're called mainline spaces. So more like, think like Episcopalian type of folks, more like liturgical in their nature, great people, super progressive, social justice oriented, stop bombing Gaza, like really amazing human beings who are doing phenomenal work and who have been around for a long time. People I look up to since I was a kid. And I've gotten the opportunity to get to know them and get to know that world thanks to this work. And what I've been telling them, and I'm going to continue to tell them loudly, is like, guys, if you're not utilizing social media and utilizing YouTube and really thinking about your messaging for that audience, you're missing it. And it doesn't matter what you say if no one hears it. It doesn't matter how good it is. If you say the best thing on the planet about how we should stop dropping bombs on kids in Gaza, which obviously we should, if no one hears it, it doesn't matter. And my concern is that and maybe you've seen this in more secular democratic spaces too. I don't know. I'm kind of new to this space, trying to get my lay of the land as soon as I can, right? But I've noticed that there is this feeling of, well, we can get on CNN, we can get on ABC, and I'm like, guys, if you think that's like a win, it's not a win. And a lot of them think that ABC operates like YouTube, where, oh, well, on ABC, I just call up a producer and I just hit, I'm on the air and boom, there's a baked in audience. So I'll just go live on YouTube with my 45 subscribers and I'll be just fine. I'm like, no, that's not how this works. You have to earn every single view on YouTube. You have to earn every single view on Instagram and TikTok. And so there has to be this come to Jesus, no pun intended, moment of like, maybe thinking that legacy media was our biggest vehicle for communication needs to be completely rethought, because right-wing media for over a decade, they started on talk radio obviously in the 80s, but since over a decade, if not more, has been burrowing inside of social media spaces, figuring out how to use the algorithm for their benefit with all the rage bait, being funded by billionaires. I mean, when you have someone fund you $20 million, $80 million, and they don't want a return, it's just for you to have to get the messaging out. You can do a lot with that kind of money. I mean, that's Turning Point USA money. Daily Wire's $300 million or $150 million. They're huge. So they have all this money. They have experts who can rig the system for their benefit. Then they complain that there's left-wing bias in social media. They completely gaslight people to think that big tech is against them, and they dominate anyway. And until we think about that strategy with a much better, inclusive, non-dehumanizing message that wants to promote the flourishing of all of our neighbors, we're never going to catch up, because we're on the wrong channels and we're not even concerned about the messaging. That's for me, a huge problem.
I think one of the base levels of the problem when it comes to the media is, I forget which one it was. It was NBC or Fox or whatever, but they had the tagline "fair and balanced."
Oh, Fox News.
It was a Fox News, right?
Yeah.
And
LOL.
that tagline, the problem, it demonstrates the problem, because if your goal is to be fair and balanced, well, suddenly your goal ain't reporting the news anymore, because reality ain't balanced. If one side is saying that, it rains snakes and the other side's saying it rains water,
right.
Well, it's not reporting to say, oh, well, the side that's saying it rains snakes has a fair point.
Right.
No, it's not. That's disservicing the community that you are serving. Right. And that's the problem that we see, is when Trump says wild things like immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. The accurate thing that the reporters should do at that moment is immediately, if they report on him saying that, they should immediately be following that up with what you said. Immigrants actually commit far fewer violent crimes and all other sorts of crimes than native-born Americans. They actually contribute less. They contribute more money in tax revenue than they consume in benefits. The CBO, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, projects that the immigrants that were admitted into this country under the Biden administration alone, and this isn't legal immigrants, this is the illegal immigrants, they are going to decrease the federal deficit by about $1 trillion over the next 10 years because of all of the productive work that they do, and the fact that they actually don't receive a lot of the benefits because they aren't here legally.
Right.
And so if the media actually reported on those facts when they are discussing a story on immigration, you would see a different population and their viewpoints change, but they don't, because they are prioritizing being fair and balanced over actually reporting the facts of the case.
Yes, and they've sane-washed us. They sane-washed Trump. I mean, and part of that is, again, for me, it goes back to how powerful right-wing media is. Talk radio, right-wing media, always vilified what Rush Limbaugh called was the drive-by media. The drive-by media is they're so leftist, they're so unbalanced, they're so unfair. And I think, frankly, a lot of news outlets are scared of being proven as such. So when Trump says crazy things, they would rather just kind of temper it a little bit, like, hey, it wasn't the best, but both sides, instead of saying, no, this guy is out of his absolute mind, here's the data, right? Because then they would be perceived as unbalanced. And that sane washing has done so much damage. I swear to God, John, when RFK got picked as the Secretary of Health for Trump's cabinet, CNN called it a, quote, provocative pick. Like, no, that's not the headline. The headline is anti-vax lunatic will kill a lot of children if this actually happens. Like that's the headline, not provocative pick RFK. That is, talk about like tempering the reality of the situation. And so it's so frustrating to see a mainstream media, be so spineless in calling out the absurdity of what Trump has brought to the country that has now become normalized through a fire hose of right-wing media misinformation.
Yeah. And, the answer to that, we can't just rely on the media to fix that, on like the mainstream media to fix that on their own, because you know what? Their incentives are aligned so that they don't. If they piss off too many people on either side, it's going to hurt them with their advertising dollars. And they don't want to do that. That's how they make their money. And so they kind of have to have this balanced thing if they want to continue to make their money. Yeah. And let's not forget, a lot of the deregulations that Trump pushed for during his first presidency allowed right-wing conglomerates to buy up a ton of local media where a lot of people do get their news and they trust way more than mainstream media. But if anyone wants to look up John Oliver, he's put together quite a few just supercuts of all of these local media reporters saying the same exact thing, because they're getting their marching orders from the same places that have consolidated these messages, right? So the answer to this is building up our ecosystem on the left. Again, I'm biased. Mark Cuban, I would love your millions.
Yeah,
but if it doesn't go to me, I want to at least go to Tim. I want to go to other people like me. John. Because I truly believe that we need to realign the incentive structures. Because right now, on our side of the media landscape, I can push back against, some of the more radical left-wing voices that might be turning people off. And I can, center us, because I don't do this full time. But people who do this full time, guess who they're relying on for their income stream? They're relying on the Patreons, who tend to be a higher level of radicalization than true believers, which is going to kind of determine, whether they're going to be able to make rent this month.
Right.
And if we can change that structure so that, hey, Mark Cuban, instead of giving millions of dollars to the Democratic Party, who just flushed it down the table and you saw no return, start your own Daily Wire. Do that. Patronize the people on the left who are delivering the kind of messaging that you want to amplify. Let us make rent. It's going to cost us a lot less, because we care a lot less about individual money than Ben Shapiro does.
We don't need $400,000 per episode. We don't need $100,000 per episode like they were getting over at Tenet Media, the Russian funded,
exactly,
show. Like, I don't need that much money. Like, I just need a few thousand to survive per month with my family. I work out of my guest bedroom. I don't need a Mercedes. Like, I'm not looking for that, right? And so I agree, though. We have to start building new coalitions, and it needs to start with progressive Christians and progressive secularists, if that's even the right term, to start finding the value. Me and I'm not sure if you know Americans United, Andrew Seidel. They do great work over there, keeping church and state separate. Him and I are good friends. He's an atheist. He's on the podcast all the time. Qassam Rashid is Muslim, but we share the same values, right? And I think that can be such a testament to what we're trying to build, is that we can work with people who might have radically different theological positions or just no theology cares at all, but we have the same values of love, justice, inclusivity, non-dehumanization. I want my MAGA neighbor to have affordable health care. I want my MAGA neighbor to have livable wages. Like, I care about them, right? And I also want my trans neighbor to have access to the health care that they need that actually literally saves their lives. We can do both if we can build and build coalitions around these values, right? And think about how we push a better narrative and give people better answers than what right-wing media gives them. Even though it's a very much an uphill battle, we can start chipping away and catching up by giving people that better path forward. So, I'm sure, like you, this stuff consumes me. I think about it all the time. I'm always ideating on it. I'm always trying to fundraise and think about how we can do this bigger, do this better, reach more people, build an umbrella network of people, be able to pay them for their podcasts, etc. Because we just have to. We just freaking have to if we want to get through these next 4 years. Because God knows that a lot of Trump voters are going to be sorely disappointed if Trump gets his way with these tariffs and with RFK, literally saying some of the craziest batshit stuff, deregulating the FDA. It's going to hurt a lot of people. And when they wake up and realize what's happening, I don't want to turn them off. I want to invite them into what we're trying to do and say, come on over. I recommend repenting first for all of your dehumanization, but repent and turn and come over, and let's find a better path forward.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Trump, the thing, when Trump first got the presidency, it was actually light bulb in my brain. I was like, wait a second. If Donald Trump, who has no experience in politics, who is a dumbass, for lack of a better term, in my personal opinion, who clearly, schedules a important press conference at Four Seasons Landscaping. This ain't some Machiavellian sharpest tool in the shed.
Right.
This is a guy who tapped into a desire for populism. Yeah. Unfortunately, he did it from the right-wing perspective.
Right.
And the thing is, right-wing populism doesn't actually help the people all that much. He gives tax cuts to the rich. He defunds, he deregulates protections for the consumer. This is what he's going to do. If he actually implements these tariffs, if he actually implements these mass deportations, well, you know what? Most of the people who voted for him were low information voters. They weren't actually voting for that. Right. A lot of them did not actually understand that that's what he's going to try to do. And if he does, they're going to be disillusioned with him and the Republicans, just like they were disillusioned with the Democrats. And what we need to be building with the absolute greatest effort we have is a new Democratic Party, a new media ecosystem that invites those people, because they are going to be disillusioned. Unless everything I know about the world is, and everything economists say about Trump's policies are absolutely wrong, they're about to be very disillusioned by what's about to happen. And when they are, we need to be ready to welcome them with open arms, because, and I say this all the time, and I get pushback on this from the left, a lot of people on the left really hate Trump voters, like really down deep hate them. And you know what? I can't always push against them. When it's a woman who has suffered from sexual assault, I understand why she would have this disdain for someone who voted for a guy who's found liable of sexual assault. And I can't really get over that. But what I always try to express is, in the same way we talk about like how systemic racism contributes to higher rates of violent crime among inner city Black communities, and how it's their personal choice to commit those crimes, but they were incredibly guided and molded by the systems in place around them that they had no control over. We need to look at Trump voters the same way. And we need to look at the kid who grew up in a small town in Kentucky, surrounded by white people, being afraid of immigrants because their pastor's been, sitting there at this evangelical church telling them how evil they are and just totally going against the teachings of Jesus. Well, you know what? I can't blame that guy. I can't really blame that guy for voting for Trump. I get it. I understand. We need to be accepting of those people instead of pushing them away like we have been for the past, several years here.
Look, maybe some from your audience are listening because, they found out that you came on the show and we had some cross followers. I'm that kid. I grew up homeschooled. I grew up super conservative fundamentalist. I grew up on a steady diet of talk radio, voted Republican my entire life, kind of consumed the talking points. I didn't know what I knew now, but it wasn't people calling me a fascist or calling me an asshole or calling me a bigot online that persuaded me to think differently. It was the people who planted little seeds of questions that I couldn't answer. One of them was the first gay person I ever met who became a good friend. His name is Joey. And we were talking one time on Facebook Messenger, probably arguing about something. And he's like, hey, I don't get it, dude. Your side always talks about freedom, but then why can't I marry who I want? Like, where's the freedom for me? And I was like, that's a very compelling question. That's a good point. Like, if we're talking about freedom, why doesn't my friend Joey get the freedom to marry who they want? Those were the questions that led me down a path that led me to the work I'm doing now, not people online saying, Tim, what do you mean you're not affirming? You're just a complete bigot then. It didn't work. I'm sure those people might have felt better that they told me off, but it never made me go, maybe there's something to that. Now, ultimately, I was bigoted for sure, but I couldn't see it because of the way my worldview was formed. So I agree. And of course, listen, to your point, I think it's an important point. I would never hold my Black neighbors, and say, well, how you have to open up your arms and just welcome in the MAGA wearing, seal the border, and Black people commit more crimes than white people. I get that. I'm not saying that is the point. What I'm saying though is that at some point people are going to start asking questions, and when they do, I want to have more compelling answers to get them to think more deeply about what they believe and why they believe it, to give them a breadcrumb trail to hopefully lead them into a better way of existing. Because frankly, I'm not sure about you, John. I don't believe in violence. I don't think violence is the answer. And these people live on the same planet that we do. We're not gonna wipe them out or something. That's ridiculous. So they exist. So what do we do if we're breathing the same oxygen? We have to find a way forward that makes it work, right? And I don't think that nonstop demonization of calling people all these names is the right key. That being said, so I can hear my audience saying, well, Tim, you call people fascists at times. Yes, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to Trump, when it comes to Charlie Kirk and all those people, they absolutely embody fascist ideals. I absolutely do use that word because that's what they're doing, right? When Trump says immigrants are poisoning the blood of society, he's echoing a sentiment from Hitler. That's just data. But I don't hold the rank and file, the average person, to the same standard because they're not the same person. So we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that, and I kind of recognized this a little while ago, is that when we call Trump a fascist, a lot of people, especially on the right, hear that as we are insulting him with a mean name. Because when they call Kamala Harris communist, or Marxist,
right,
they don't actually mean Kamala Harris wants to seize the means of production. That's not what they mean. They're using it just as a pure insult. They have no understanding of what communism actually is.
Great point.
And so when we're using fascist, we're not using it as an insult. We're using it as a descriptor. And that we're not trying to attack him as his person. We're attacking his ideology, and we are describing it accurately. And I think that kind of will give you a good perspective as to why people push back on that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Well, I mean, Jon, I know we're almost out of time here. Where can folks find you? I mean, you're all over the internet. Plug all of your channels. Yeah,
so Counterpoint Politics on TikTok is, my main platform with the largest audience. It's Counterpoint_politics on Instagram, as well as Threads. If you want my most up-to-date opinions on everything, Threads is where I'm just shooting those off. And then also, as I alluded to earlier, I have the Left Wing Pod. Look that up on YouTube. Subscribe there. That's where I'm bringing together other content creators. It's me and my co-host TJ from Powers Taken Not Given. You might recognize him from TikTok as well. But we bring on content creators such as Tim, such as, many people across the spectrum who you probably recognize. And we're trying to build that, left-wing Daily Wire. And it is hard goings, but we're getting more and more momentum. I've had a ton of people like Tim reach out to me and try to connect, because we all recognize what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I would love for it to be the left wing, but again, it doesn't have to be. I want to support whatever's working.
Yeah, I'm
so
that
find
way
me
too.
there as well.
I'm very pragmatic. Whatever we got to do to make things better, I don't care what we call it. I don't care whose label we're on. I'm just here to make it happen. So awesome. Well, Jon, again, thanks for making time. I really appreciate it. You're in Philly. I'm sure we'll meet up for a cheesesteak or maybe for a pork roll, egg and cheese sandwich soon. That's some East Coast speak for all of you non-East Coasters out there. And we'll talk again soon. Go Eagles.
Go Birds. Let's go.